I have access.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Thanks everybody for making it. I know a lot of the faces that are in the meeting, or at least names, but I'll just give you a quick kind of overview of me before we jump into what we're going to talk about. I've been developing with Access since version 1.0, and I kind of put developing in quotes because I think for the first 3 or 4 months I had no clue what I was doing. This is back when you started Access and you had a file and a help, and that was it. And there wasn't, a lot of documentation. But I stuck with it, and by 1.1, I was actually earning a living at it. We started using SQL Server with a beta version of Access 2.0. That was like the first release that Microsoft and Sybase kind of went their separate ways. I ran a small consulting firm in Colorado for 15, 16 years. We specialized in, either clients that were small businesses that didn't have an IT shop, or departments in large corporations that did, but it was going to take 2 years for them to even look at what they wanted. In 2008, I guess I had my first midlife crisis, and instead of getting a sports car or a younger girlfriend, I got a job with Microsoft as a test engineer on the Access team. Was there, worked on 3 releases of Access. And don't feel bad because I eventually got the younger girlfriend in the sports car, so it all kind of worked out in the end. I've been fortunate to present all over the world. I enjoy talking about Access. I am a past member and officer of the Denver Area Access User Group, and I will put a bit of a plug in here if you haven't already heard. But Carl Donenbonner has taken the Vienna conference, which was supposed to be, I think, the 26th and 27th of April in Vienna, and is making it virtual. So you can go sign up with this link. I don't know, is there a chat in this? I didn't see a chat window. Maybe? No. Well, maybe
yes,
Jim
there
can.
is.
There's
there
a
is.
conversation bubble to the upper right, probably.
Yeah, and I don't see it from my view. Anyways, maybe Jim or George can paste that in there. Anyways, I'm currently kind of back doing the consulting gig, this time specializing migrating Access apps to the cloud. So we take your Access or SQL database, we migrate it to SQL Server Azure, clean up the Access front end, and then we can build a .NET Core MVC on top of that. And just a little about personally, I enjoy still playing baseball and traveling the world looking for a place to semi-retire, preferably that's got good beer. And my last beer adventure was kind of interesting, and I'm trying to get some mileage out of what it cost me. But we were on our way to Portugal last month, and about halfway to Amsterdam, I learned of the travel ban that was going to happen on Friday. This was Wednesday night. And so not wanting to get stuck for 30 days, and of course, when you're at 35,000 feet, you don't get a lot of information. So we landed and decided that we would just do a 180, and we actually were able to book tickets on the exact same plane back to Seattle. Now we had about 30 minutes to kill before boarding, so we had a Heineken and flew home. The Heineken was about 8:30 in the morning, and I'm pretty sure there's not too many beers worth flying 19 and a half hours for. Heineken's definitely not one of them. So, but it was just kind of either good timing or poor timing, depending on how you look at it. But that turned out to be a fairly expensive beer. Anyways, so enough about me. What we're going to look at is a couple add-ins that I have, I guess, rewritten over the last year or so. The first is the AccessUI Data Source Manager, which is basically a direct replacement for the link table manager. And then the second one is a ribbon and tree builder, which you can use to build kind of professional interfaces fairly quickly. And with that, we'll look at a sample app first, just so you can get an idea of what it can create. We'll look at the add-in, and then we'll go ahead and kind of show you how you might add it to a database of yours. No, the Q&A, I'm looking to keep this kind of informal, so feel free to ask questions along the way if there's something that didn't quite make sense. I may be going to cover that later. So I guess just unmute yourself and hop in. A couple of the design goals I wanted to do is first, both these add-ins were written 15 years ago. And when I went to work for Microsoft, I guess 12 years ago, they wanted me to stop developing. They thought it was kind of a conflict of interest. So they got shelved for several years. And then after I left Microsoft, quite honestly, didn't have the motivation. I now have the motivation. So I decided that I would just rewrite these, figuring that I knew a lot more than I did 15 years ago. One of the kind of design tenets I wanted to keep in mind was no ActiveX controls. My other add-ins used ActiveX controls liberally, and that certainly in today's day and age can be problematic. ActiveX controls aren't the most secure, and you've got to worry about 32-bit and 64-bit. Another thing that I really wanted to do was support 32 and 64-bit operating or Office installs. The 64 didn't exist until Office 2010, so it was something that predated my work, postdated my work with the add-ins. And then I wanted to monetize the UI. Mine looked pretty snazzy back when Office 2002 was the thing. But if you look ahead, there's a lot of things have changed just in the way things look and some of the functionality and access. And then I wanted to try to keep the bar for entry, either make it make it easier to use in existing tools or existing features, not require a lot of code from the end user, and certainly with the ribbon, basically isolate the XML from the end user. So with that, let me see if I can fire up a copy of Access here. I assume you guys are seeing that? Yes?
Absolutely, yes.
We'll see. Yeah, okay, good. So it is not displaying just the PowerPoint. So to launch this, actually first, let me show you, I was gonna show you how to, one caveat. When you download this, it's a zip file, and inside the zip file, there is an installer directory that has an exe and the actual, the add-in in a library file that you can install manually. The add-in is much simpler, or sorry, the executable is much simpler to do because it'll go ahead and set all the registry information for you and copy the files to the right location. If you don't want to do that, the manual install, there's a README file in there that'll show you how to install it. You just need to make sure you start Access as admin. If you don't, you won't have the permissions to register the add-in. So my installer gets around it. But if you use the installer, you're likely to see something like this, which I'm sure you've all seen. It's the Microsoft Defender Smart Screen saying, hey, I don't know what this file is. So if you click more information and hit run anyways, it'll then install it. There's nothing malicious about my file. Again, it's going to install 2 files and set registry. It's just that I don't have 500 downloads a day to get positive reputation on the file yet. So I'm not going to bother. It's a pretty simple wizard. But just so you're aware, if you do that, it'll then create an add-in entry here. And this is a sample database that has just a bunch of different links. And you can see it pops up. Let me resize it a bit. And let me collapse things down. I'll give you just kind of a quick overview. Basically, it works in 3 levels. The first level is going to show you kind of the different major types of things you have linked in your database. So in this case, you can see I can have a CSV or a text file, I can have a DSN, I can have Access and Excel files, ODBC and SQL Azure. I also have a little support for Oracle, and I'll show you an example of that in a little bit, but I'm not an Oracle person, so I can't really test it. Anyway, so the first level just groups things. The second level, if you drill in, will show you your data source. And so you can see the DSN, I've got 3 of them. I can actually hover over them and it'll show me information about it. Basically, it shows me the connection string, or at least enough of the connection string so I can see what the database and the server and things like that are. If it's an Access file, it'll show you the path. ODBC, again, it's going to show you the driver you're using and things like that. I also am warning you if you're storing a password in clear text. So here's a sample link, and you can see out there the user ID and the password. It's probably not the best practice to store your password in an ODBC connection because it's in plain text and anybody can come along and read it. So I'm kind of warning you about those. You can also double click on a link, and let me find, let's look at this one. I'm going to double click on that link and let me open up. Oh, that's interesting. Control G, sorry. I thought I was opening up. Oh, hang on a second. I'm trying to get Visual Basic running. Anyways, if you double click on a link, it'll spit out the whole connection string and tell you what it was in your immediate window. So you can copy and paste it someplace else. Oh, that's the wrong ad, and that's the second one. Ah, all right, slow down. There we go. So that's kind of the parent level where all those linked tables work. So if anybody used the old link table manager, when you would select your tables, it was all one big list. And if you got one table that was wrong, it would prompt you for every single one, or one table that was different. So kind of a bummer. With this, they're all grouped together. So I can go in here and drill down, and you can see the tables in there. I can select them all or not. I can double click on a link and it'll jump me to that table. So if you're in there and you want to find it, you can quickly get to it. And I try to identify tables. So this here is a view, and you can see it's in red. I hope you can see that in the screen. If I double click on this, it's red because it actually has a local index. And let me go find one. Here is one that is in red, but it has an exclamation point. It doesn't have a local index. And so if I go back to this one, you can actually edit your index, and you can see the attendee ID is the index. If I say edit the index, it takes a second to spin up that SQL server because it's cold. You can see now it shows with an exclamation point that there is no index on that. So it helps you kind of identify any places where maybe you need an index and don't have them. The other kind of tables that I tend to look at or tables are pass-through queries, because pass-through queries have a connection string. So in this case, I made it kind of a dark purple and I put PT. That may change, but for right now, I needed some way to kind of show it was different. You can also find things. So if I start typing bank, it's going to match the first occurrence of bank. And as I hit return, it'll just toggle through all those. Now I can also filter on bank, and it'll show me those 3 records. The only thing that really is different between the two is that when I do the find, it's going to search every single node, whereas if I do a filter, it's only going to look for things that match in the table name. So if I was to search on SQL Server, I would get that as a hit. So, and then you can clear the filter with that. So that's kind of a quick overview. Let me show you a kind of a real world database and how you can use it to relink. So I'm going to close, actually maybe I can just open it from here and keep it running. Yep. So this is a production database that I've just disabled the UI in. And so I'm gonna go ahead and start this. And you can see it popped up. And this is more typical of what you'll see when you're using one of your databases. I've got one table that's an access table, and this is actually an error log. So it gets created and errors get logged to it locally. So each user would get their own error log. I've usually centralized that, but for this client, it made sense to have it on the user's desktop. And then here, as I drill in, you can see there are 93 links to this database. So if I wanted to come in and validate that these links are all connected, I can simply check here, and I can say relink, and what it's going to do is it's going to force me to log in, because I don't have, if I cancel this, you can see I don't have, and hover over this, there is no connection information, there's no username and password in there. So it's going to prompt me for that. So it'll prompt me if I can put it in correctly. I hit OK. Now you can see it blasted through the pass-through queries really quick, because the pass-through queries basically just changes the string and moves on. Each of these tables is actually going out and relinking and validating things are working. If you get one table it can't find, it'll give you that little yellow icon. Now I will say this is a SQL Azure database that's on the East Coast, and I'm on the West Coast, so it's about as slow as it can get from in the US. When the client links normally, just pushing a button, it takes them about 20 seconds to relink all the tables. It takes me over a minute. You also have the ability to stop the relinking, and it'll warn you if you want to stop or continue. I'll just go ahead and stop the linking. So that's how you would kind of validate a connection. Now, if you wanted to, let me make sure I got those unchecked. This is a test database that some of the tables have been left linked to, largely because the pass-through queries in production get updated as they're called. So every time it's called, I determine what the connection is and then set the string. So I don't really have to relink those in this database. And then these are some views that I believe just got orphaned and updated to something else. But if I wanted to change those back to the production environment, I can do that by just saying always prompt for new location. And now it's going to pop up and say, okay, tell me what you want. So here's where I could go in and I could change to the driver. I could update this. I'm going to go ahead and put the username in. And I'm going to put a bogus password. I will test the connection, and you can see it says, yep, it's a bad connection. If I go put a good password in there, it validates that it's good. And once I click on this, it'll let me go ahead and link things. So that's connecting to different tables. What if you want to add a new table? That's a pretty common scenario. And maybe let me switch back to the other database. There's a few more things we can see there. So once you, oh, what's going on there? Okay, once you've got a database, if you want to link other things to it, you can simply click on the link and press the Add Table button, and it'll show you all the tables in that database. It'll highlight the ones that you've currently linked. So assuming it can figure out the actual table name versus the alias name, it'll show it as being linked. And then you can select all the tables that you haven't linked, or you can select all the tables, or you can select none of the tables. So instead of having to go jump through a bunch of hoops, I think somebody from the Portland group documented the process, and it takes 11 steps to use the new and improved link table manager if you want to connect a new table. With mine, I think it's maybe 3. So if you're on a database, let's go down to this. This is the SQL Server one. It's going to actually ask me, oh no, it cached the connection, so it's there. You know, it's like 2 steps there. Select your tables, and then hit Add Link, and away you go. You can also filter just like you can in the other one. If I click Add Link, it should have added that. Oh, it looks like it added it in a new node with DBO bank account. So there you go. Let's see. So I think that's everything. I said there was Oracle. So let me open up another database. This one, an end user sent me with some samples. And this actually has the Oracle stuff, a connection running to it. Now, if I hover over this connection string, you can see it's got just a ton of properties. And to build a dialog box to manage this didn't make sense. So I came up with a way you can edit the connection string. So with this, it basically strips it out into components. You can then go in and say, oh, yeah, I want to change the username to user2, and change this to W. I want it to be WDD or WDA, and you can quickly change whatever element you need or property you need. There are 29 values here. Maybe there's 30 values total, or maybe there's 50 options here. I'm never going to know them all. With this one, you can go in and do it. Now, let's say you wanted to add one that wasn't listed. You can actually go over to the manually edit, and let's just go in here. Actually, let's just put it here. Kevin equal test. And then I can actually format it if I want, so it'll drop it in there. And then if I go back, it added it in the same kind of location it was. So this is the way you can go in and I guess kind of quickly edit any ODBC connection. And then once you've got it, you can choose to connect all or update all, or if you had selected an individual table, it'll give you the option to select just the selected ones in there. I can't do this because I don't have permissions to the SQL server or to the Oracle server, so it would error out here. So I think that is what I wanted to cover there. Are there any questions? Anything that wasn't clear?
Kevin, I'm curious about views and relinking views in the table, in the out of the box table manager, you have to go back in and you have to re-identify the indexes.
Yep, let me go back. I've got one here, this one.
While you're setting that up, Kevin, Dale Phi wants to know what versions of Access this will work in.
I am going to cover that in a slide.
Okay, that way.
Yeah, but as a spoiler, this will work on Access 2010 and newer. I'm using some of the components that were introduced in 2010, so it won't work on 2007 or older. But I'll give you a little more details about that. So I think it was Dawn that was asking connecting to views.
Yes, sir.
And so here is a view, right? And if I go edit it, you can see the attendee is the primary key. And I think if we open this table, you can see, in theory, I could edit this. It's showing up as an editable record source. So let's go ahead and just relink it. And if I remember correctly, it would blow away your index when you do this.
Exactly.
So I just relinked it. And if we make sure we're on the right table, open it again, the index is still there. So what I'm doing when I relink is I'm saying, oh, hey, you've got a local index. Remember that. Blow away the table, relink the table, and go.
And so reapply the index. Great.
Yep. Yeah. So it should catch that. Any other questions, comments? You guys asleep yet? I know Ken and Phil have a beer.
Well, and you know I'm awake.
Yeah, exactly. All right, then I will.
I have a question, Kevin.
Yeah.
So in that first sample Access application that you opened, you had an Azure SQL database whose name looks suspiciously like an Access Web Apps server. Is that actually really one, or did you just go nostalgic and name it like a...
No, it actually is a couple old web app servers.
Perfect.
Yep.
Hats off.
Yeah. Yeah. It's anyways, for those you don't know, I was at...
I'm actually done my beer, Kevin.
Oh, well, you can get another one.
Well, then I'd miss out on your presentation.
Oh, that's true. What George was talking about was the Access Web Apps, which we worked on the majority of the time I was at Microsoft, and then unceremoniously got deprecated a year or so later. So it was unfortunate to spend that much effort on something and have it kind of go by the wayside. All right. Hey, look at that. I'm back at the PowerPoint deck. So that's the demo. So a quick recap. This is really geared kind of toward the developer, not a way for the end user to relink tables. They could certainly use this, but there's all sorts of things they could do that you probably don't want them to do. But it's good for ad hoc stuff. If you're always deploying a test database or a production database, you don't have to worry about the user doing it. This may work fine for you. Again, it groups tables by source. You can validate. It'll try to reuse a connection string. It'll show you what tables are already linked, which is a feature somebody wanted. And then you can select things by double clicking in the navigation pane. You can manually edit the connection string, and it provides a warning if you've got a stored password in your database. You can also relink the pass-through queries, and then you have the ability to search. and identify which tables have local indexes, and you can edit those indexes. I suppose I should put on the bullet point, it remembers your indexes for you. We were talking what's requirements. So again, it's 2010 or later, largely because I used the empty cell in the layout and shared images and things like that that didn't exist in earlier versions. It will work on x64 and 32-bit. So pretty much any version of Office 2010 or newer will work. You can use it with an MDB or an ACCDB file format. It's just the version of Access has to be there. And it's completely free. You can go download it at this URL, which if I could figure out where the chat was, I would post it in there, but I'll do that at the end. Or I think maybe there's a way you guys can get the slide deck. If not, I got my email in it later, just email me. Okay, so unless there's any other questions,
Well,
I'll go ahead.
Kevin,
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how you make money on this. Is it by volume?
Yeah, exactly. No, it was something that, you know, when I originally did this one, I never really got around to releasing it because of the time at Microsoft, but I've always kind of intended just to give it away just to see how many people would use it. You know, 10, 12 years later, I think the pool of Access developers has shrunk quite a bit. But we'll see. Maybe it was a mistake. Try it out. If you want to send me some money, feel free, but you don't have to. Okay. All right. So we'll move on to the ribbon.
Hey, Kevin?
Yeah.
Do you have a Patreon account?
No.
Oh, well, there you go.
No. Yeah. Maybe I should. I seem to have lost my folder. Whoops. Nope, that's there. Sorry, I had a folder with all the information. So what we're going to look at next is the Ribbon Tree Builder demo. And this is basically the Northwind database kind of cleaned up a little bit. And I mean just a very little bit. But you can see across the top, we have a pretty nice ribbon, or I guess reasonably nice ribbon across the top. And here's a couple buttons that I should have deleted that I forgot. We'll show you how easy it is to delete those. We'll kind of go backwards through this so you can see what kind of things it'll build. These are just two standard menus that I selected. One is the compact and repair. The other is that add-in menu. So there's not much about those that's interesting. In the next tab, I've got some reports and some queries. This just, you know, loads a query. That'll load a report. I believe this one here prompts you for information, then loads another report. So again, just standard stuff, pretty simple to do with a ribbon. And there's a few more, and I think that's just a sales report. So here's where I think things get maybe a little more interesting. Here is a list of your shippers. And as you click through here, it changes. And that in itself is not too exciting, but I can make a tree with multiple levels. So here is a tree where I can drill in by employee. I can then drill into an order. And if I want to drill down to products, I can drill down to products. So this is the exact same form as this. It's just rendering differently. Now you see that this one says complete and this one says complete. This is just samplers that show you different ways you can build it. And I've got pretty decent performance out of this tree. I'm building almost 3,000 nodes in about 0.3 of a second. So pretty snappy. You can also do a dynamic tree. And the difference here, if you look at it, is it built 29 nodes, which is the number of nodes here. And then as I drill into each node, it loads these dynamically. So you can see now it says I just loaded 3 nodes in 0.055 seconds. So this is really handy if you have 10,000 or 100,000 or 1,000,000 rows. If you can break it down hierarchical, where you only have a couple hundred rows in each level, you can have massive trees and the performance isn't gonna suffer. So that's products and supplies. Products and categories is just another simple dynamic tree. The customers by country. The only thing that's unique about this one is there is no subform associated with this level. So as I drill into the customers, it's there. When I click a subform, it's not. And then these two are samples that we'll skip over. This one is just another simple list, but you can see I've added icons for each level. So as you drill in, you can see each individual person. And then the, I guess, third type.
So Kevin, just a question.
Yeah.
This is Dale.
Yeah,
So you're basically using a node click event to then populate the subform with a subform control with the proper subform.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's all, you'll see in the next little bit how hopefully simple it is to set one of these up. But that's exactly what's happening. So I'll show you this now. The other thing that's I think kind of interesting is that I keep track of all these. So as you flip through, it remembers what tab is open. So you can use it kind of as a switchboard to jump between open forms. Yeah, and then so the third type of tree view is a recursive. And the recursive one basically lets you build like an org chart. So if you have a table that self-references, or if you can design a query that has that, you can run one query and build n numbers of levels. And it's smart enough, it'll put all the linking and stuff like that in there for you. The fourth and final kind of tree view is the complex tree. I also call this the Jim Pilcher tree. Jim wasn't the first person to ask for this feature, but at the Portland conference, he gave the most realistic use case scenario. And that is, I want to have one view, in this case, it's my employees. And when I drill in, I want to see sales and direct reports. So two things that are completely unrelated. If I drill into direct reports, you can see the different people that report to it, and of course that subform works. If you go into sales, you see the sales. So this allows you to build fairly complex trees, just kind of randomly, I guess. So.
Hey, Kevin, I don't see my name embedded in there anywhere as the filter tree.
No, actually, Armin Stein was the first person that said, hey, it'd be cool if you could do this. But he couldn't come up with a good scenario. So it wasn't until Portland when you said, oh yeah, they want to see two different things at the same time. So anyways, so that's just a tour of kind of the things you can build. Let me close down some of these forms and let me go to tools and add-ins, and we'll open the right add-in this time. And basically everything is stored in a table. So if you haven't played with ribbons, it's a very kind of structured XML document. And you always have to have kind of a ribbon parent level. And in this case, you just give it a name, and that's so you can select it from here. If you have multiple ribbons, it's a unique identifier. Probably the biggest option is the start from scratch. By setting start from scratch, it'll give you a clean slate, which is probably what most of you want to do when you're shipping it to a client. But in development, you might want to keep some of the other design ribbons and see the user ribbon. So if you uncheck the start from scratch, it'll actually append the ribbon behind the access one. So that's just kind of a header level. The next level is the tabs. And a tab is really nothing more than a placeholder. You can see Northwind reports and tools correspond to Northwind reports and tools across the top. You can give it whatever label you want here, which is also going to be the name. There are a few other events, but we're going to skip over those because really you're not going to need them that often. And then you have to have a group. So these are groups. So if I go to, if I flip back to Northwind, you can see employees, customers, products, orders, legacy. They correspond to those groups. It's just really kind of a bucket that you're going to put your controls into. So again, all you really need is a label at that level. Once you have all that, then you can go into the employees. And I'm going to go ahead and clean up the mess that I forgot to delete. And you can see it knows that I've changed my ribbon, and so I need to save it. We'll talk about that a little bit. But as you click in here, all you need to do to define a button is pick the control type, give it a label, probably want to give it an image, and then you can go select one of 4 kind of predetermined attributes. The first is load from tree. And if I select that one again, it says, okay, tell me what kind of tree you want to build. And I can select this one, I think is the org structure. So we'll select that again, hit okay. Likewise, I could say, well, no, I really want to load a form, and I can go ahead and pick any of the forms in the database. The forms, reports, and queries all work the same. I'm just going to go ahead and set this back to the org structure. And once you have that, you can basically navigate. My thinking here is between a Treeview, form, report, query, you're probably going to cover 90% of what you need to do with a ribbon, and you don't have to write any XML. Now, if you wanted to, say, clone this one, you can simply hit the clone. It'll drop in a new button. And if I want to move this to the end, I can simply drag it down. It'll drag it down. I can then maybe give it a different image. And so if I click here, you can see it changed to a new tab. And this exposes, I believe, the vast majority of the built-in Office images, including things like Excel. Now, there's, I think, about 2,000 of them that I've listed, which is a lot. So you can actually search for these. So if I search for Access, you can see it showed up anything that has Access in the MSO ID name. And I can search for Excel. I can maybe search for Word. I can search for user, and it remembers all those search results. So as I go through here, I can see which ones are there. If I decide I didn't really need Word, I can remove that search. And that search result will stay there for the duration of your Access session. So let's pick, say, the Access icon. You also have custom icons, which is probably more useful because you can pick anything under the sun. Those are all stored as shared images. So if you've ever used the 2010 or later shared resource, there's an internal table called MSys resources that stores images one time in a database. So if you're using the same image across a report or a form, it's in your database one time, minimizes the bloat, and the best part is you have one place to go change it. So I can select an image here. Now, only one of these is going to work, and by default, I have made the MSO ID that. So let's change, let's go ahead and add a new button. So to do that, I can just say add a control. And here's the different types. Buttons are by far the most common, but you can have checkboxes, edit boxes, and then some of the pro features are like multi-level menus or drop-downs or a split button, which I won't cover today. Let's go ahead and pick a button, and then we'll call it dog. We can pick any of those images. How about we use, is there a dog image, you think? Nope, no dog image. Well, let's go ahead and, well, I guess I should pick the axis. Let's pick a different axis icon. Now let's go ahead and say what we're going to load. Let's log the org structure again. And that's it. So that's all you really have to do is select it here, give it a label, give it an image. What do you want to do? It's storing your form or your tree in a callback. Now, one of the things I think is unique about my tool compared to some of the tools I've seen is you can preview it dynamically. So if I click on this, it saves it, it brings up a ribbon preview, and you can see here's our changes. And if I click on the org, it didn't like that at all. I've seen that happen before when you have too many trees bouncing around. Let's go back in. And we'll notice here, right, those buttons I removed are there, but the two new ones didn't show up. So if I go back into the ribbon and tree, so let's go ahead and preview this again. And you can see there's the new ones, and it should work. It does change the ribbon back. So you've got to go back to the preview button, and apparently both buttons did the same thing. Now, if I want to deploy this button, I have to do the build and save. And what the build and save is going to do is it's going to compile the XML and stick it into your MSys, or sorry, into your USys ribbons table. That's all you have to do. And now if I were to close this, compact and repair to do, well, let's just try it. So I'll close out of this. You can see the buttons aren't there. Compact and repair is kind of the quickest way to open and close a database. And there you go. So now we have those two buttons there. So I think that's kind of the overview on the ribbon piece. The Treeview piece, in a lot of respects, is a lot simpler. Let's go ahead and open that up. And I'm going to start with the employees. It's a very simple one. With the ribbon, we had 4 levels. With a tree, there's really only 2. All we have is a header. And in the header, we have to select what type of tree it is. And you've got these 3 plus the complex one. Once you select complex, you can't change back to the other ones. You give it a name, and this name is really just all that's going to show up here. You can set the width, so that's how wide it's going to be. And then I use tabbed dialogues, but I know a lot of people still like the overlapping kind of windows. So if you have that turned on, you can actually set the default width of the form and whether you want it maximized or modal. So that's kind of the parent level. And then you have a level for each tree. And you don't have to give it a friendly name. The friendly name will show up here. But in this case, it's pretty self-explanatory. I've got a SQL statement. And if I go click on that, I can edit it in the window. And let's say I want to change my employee to be a descending order. It'll say, hey, do you want to save your changes? Yep. And it updates the SQL to have order by descending. Now, one of the things I tried to do to make this simpler than the old version was instead of having to specify specifically what field you want to be your ID and what field to display, I said, well, let's always make the first field your primary key. Let's always make the second field what your caption is going to be. So you don't have to do anything to specify that. All you have to do here is pick whichever field you want to use as the key to the subform, should it be different than the actual key, and then select what form it is. And we can preview this, and you can see now it's turned the order around. Unfortunately, when you click here, you can't load it because that would require a subform loading into an add-in, which is never going to happen. So that's the, I guess like that's probably the simplest tree view where you're just doing it as a list. Let's look at the orders by employee. And this one here, again, build completely, that's all the same. But now I have specified a friendly name and a little more complex SQL because I'm calculating the count of orders, and I'm going to display that as a subtext field. Everything else is the same. You got the employees form. Orders, very similar. We're going out and we're figuring out what the orders are, and I'm getting the customer name out of that. So what you'll see is the order date and then from the customer name. Now, in this case, you see it says the third field is the key to the parent level, which in this case is the order employee ID, which is going to match up to here. And that's how the levels get associated. And then products is basically the exact same thing. So if we preview this one, you can see that's the subtext field showing you the count of orders. So if I go into Steve Buchanan, there's going to be 40, and you can take my word for it, there's 42 there. And whether you do dynamically, which I think, which one is products by categories? Oop, that happens sometimes when I flip between views. The build dynamically is basically exactly the same. You can actually toggle between them. The build recursively is only going to look at the very first level. So if I were to change this one, it would just show the first level. Let me close because I think that'll help with the error. And we'll look at the complex one last. Now this one basically starts out like a regular tree, but you can see there's a field up here that says, oh, what's your level type? Well, you're a query. In here, I set a header, and all I have to do is give it a name, what I want to call it. I can optionally select an icon for it. The icons really need to be kind of 16 pixels by 16 pixels for the tree. Otherwise, they make the tree the size of the icon, which probably is not what you want. And then optionally, I could do a static subform. So if there's information or something static, I could link to that. It's just there's no data associated with this level. You're going to see this level on every single record on the first level. And then the third level is the sales level. And with the sales level, it basically is going to skip level 2 when it looks at its relationship. So level 1 was the, let's see, level 1 is the employee. So employee ID is our primary key. And if we go look at the direct reports, the reports to is the key to that. So you will see what people directly report to the current user. And then of course we can preview that, and you can see, I don't think Margaret has one person working for her. So that's how easy it is to set up a tree. A couple of the other things, I support importing a ribbon. So if you have an existing ribbon, you can do it. I'm saying it's experimental just because I haven't had enough people test it to really know how well it works. But basically you pick your ribbon, it'll say, okay, I'm gonna give it a new name, so it's not gonna mess up your existing ribbon. You'll import it, it should build out all the XML. If there's anything that it doesn't understand, it'll put it in the static XML commands. Or if it's something I don't support yet, like the backstage, it'll stick that block in here. So you won't lose it, you just won't be able to edit it. And then the rest of the stuff is just, actually, it'll make more sense when I show you how to insert it into a new database. So I'll show you that next. Any questions? Anything not clear? Anything you want to see more of? Okay, I guess silence is...
Kevin, I do have a question.
Yeah.
I may grab this because I think this, I like ribbons, and I write all of mine custom inside of Visual Studio and import them with my own little homegrown utility into my Access databases. But I think I'll get hold of this because I've got some ribbons I'd like to try to import, things that I like. Custom crafted dynamic menus and drop-down boxes, what we call combo boxes. So I'll give that a try and see if you can import them.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'll be able to import them. It's just the question of how well. You know, it may be one of those things that it's not worth the cleanup, or it may be like, oh yeah, it got me 90% of what I want, and then I just, you know, maybe had to change the images. So yeah, let me know how it goes.
Will do.
Okay. So if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to show you what it takes to insert this into your database or any database. And let me drag this down. So I want to show you kind of the before. This is a more or less clean version of the Northwind database. So I'm going to go ahead and fire that off. And you can see there's that same switchboard. Let me scroll up to the tables. You can see there's the tables. If I go to the add-in and say I want to go ahead and preview, sorry, that one. Every time the add-in starts, it looks to see if the add-in doesn't match with the database. In this case, it's a database that's never had the add-in run on it. So it's going to say, hey, you know, what do you want to do here? For order for this to work, I have to insert 6 tables in your database, and I've marked them as USys, AccessUI, whatever. They're totally open. You can go see what's in there. No secrets. It's just I need a place to store the ribbons, things like that. I also need to have 2 forms, one kind of the wrapper tree, and then the subform renders, or sorry, the tree renders in its own subform. finally, I need a module in your database to actually call into my library. And then I have to set references to 2 access files, the Treeview access file and the AccessUI Ribbon and Tree Builder library file. Finally, I need to make sure you have an Office object library reference set. So it's going to do all those things. If you hit cancel, it'll just shut down, won't do anything. So we're going to go ahead and say update all. And that's kind of an interesting byproduct. And since it actually brought this to focus, let me show you what it did here. Is it created a library folder and it dropped in the ACCDE files. And because I've hit them, you can see the lock files as well. So I'll move that out of the way.
Hey, Kevin?
Yeah.
The setting the reference to the Office library, are you doing that in VBA or external to Office, out in Windows?
VBA.
Okay. I'd like to talk to you about that some other time. Thanks.
Yeah. At least I think it is, because I don't think I have anything external here. This is all 100% VBA. Anyways, so when you come in, it creates, kind of a my first ribbon just to get you started. If you hit preview here, this one, notice that I don't have the start from scratch set. So when I hit preview, it actually, I generate a blank tab just to differentiate it from your ribbon, because if you had your ribbon loaded and this, you get 2 copies. So the preview is on this side, and there you go. There's a sample button. So now let's create another button, and I want to show you another way you can generate a callback. So let's go ahead and say add a control button, test. I can select the image here if I want. We'll pick that one. And then we talked, that I try to get the 90% covered. But if there's a case where you've got something, you're like, okay, I need to write some custom code, you can do that. All you do is select custom. Call back. Just because I think I might have left one in there. So give it a name. And then if you select this button here, which is kind of in the pro version, we'll talk about the different versions, it's going to go ahead and generate a module with a callback. So I don't know about you, but before I wrote this, I had never done enough ribbon customization to get it kind of ingrained in memory. So I always had to go look up the signature here. There's a couple different styles, and I'm never sure which is which. But anyways, this just created a little stub of VBA code. And if I say message box, whoops. Almost said hello Pog. We'll create that. Make sure it's right. I'll save it. Let's minimize that. Now let's go ahead and do a preview. And if we look at the tab here, you can see I've got my test ribbon. And if everything goes well, I fired off VBA code. So now you can do whatever you want. On a button, hopefully I've covered it. But as Jim was saying, like there's custom menus and stuff like that. Maybe that's a place where you'd want to use this. It also supports what's called a dynamic menu, where you can build it on the fly. And inside that VBA, I would have to call a routine that would return the XML that is supposed to get rendered. So that's a topic for another time. But that's all you have to do to really create one of these and set it up. So again, if I hit build and save, because this is the first time I've done it, it's saying, okay, my first ribbon is not the current ribbon. Do you want to set it? And if I hit yes, it's going to basically go into, I don't know if you'll see it or not, but if I go into the current database, yeah, there it is. It actually set that for you. And again, if I restart the database, it should show up. And then the other big piece is the tree view. So let's just go ahead and create a very simple test tree view. And again, all I have to do is give it a name here. It's probably best to give it a caption because this is what's going to show up on the form. And then we'll pick an image. Let's pick the same trade batch as image. We'll save that. And we're going to build the tree completely. So now we'll go ahead and add a level. Don't have to give it a name. I can just go click here and let's do customers. I can drop in that. Let's sort it, close it, yes. And then we'll say customer ID and customer is there. Save it. We can preview it. So that looks right. So let's now go back here. Let's add another button. And because I like Access so much, let's pick the Access icon. Whoops. Like that. Now if we select load tree, I should have one tree there. Hit select. Hit save. If I hit preview, there's my test tree. And you can see there it is. So it loaded, placed an icon there, added the form caption, and somehow I got stuck into eval mode, which stops after 10 nodes. Interesting.
So
I must,
Kevin, is the tree view functionality tied directly to the ribbon, to your ribbon functionality?
right now, yes, but I think you could probably work around that. You would still have to, build it here, but you could probably figure out, or I could figure out a way you could say, oh, just call this and it would load that form with the number. I mean, I'm doing that now, whether or not I've exposed it. If it's something you're interested, it's a good idea.
Yeah, because
Although,
that's, I mean, one of the things I dislike about the ribbon is how much vertical space it takes. And with most of the monitors nowadays being really wide but not very tall, taking up vertical space sometimes is detrimental. So I've kind of shied away from the ribbons to some extent.
you can collapse it, right?
Yeah, but like when I collapse it when I'm in development mode, and then it's like, man, I have to go through all the 4 different steps to get to one button when I do that. But and that part of that issue is that I spent so much time building custom menus and shortcut menus back in the day that I got really used to having menus, single line menus followed with shortcuts. That I was so comfortable with that I just shied away from the ribbon and the XML that needed to write it. So I was just wondering, whether or not that you could call the table, the tree view from, a VBA, open form kind of thing, and pass it a parameter or the name of the tree or whatever, and it would then just do that for you.
Yeah, I don't see why it's not possible. I mean, that's effectively what I'm doing when you click on it. I don't remember what it's called, and breaking the first rule of
presentations.
Yeah, never do stunt coding.
No, understood. No, it's just something I was I mean, I haven't played with ribbons, and I'm going to download this and try to play with the ribbons a little bit because I like the interface, and
so I think
but I've got a couple of clients who could use a Treeview, and I've shied away from Treeviews lately as well because they just took so much coding, and this looks pretty slick, and so I was just thinking about maybe taking advantage of this for a client.
Yeah, no, it's certainly try it out. I'm pretty sure there's a way you can do it. I might have to write a little snippet of kind of a wrapper function that you say, okay, your tree ID, boom, load it. I do have, and I don't think it's going to affect anybody here, but I had a user hit a bug that I had never seen and nobody else had ever seen. But basically, if you're running your copy of Access in a language that doesn't evaluate a Boolean to true or false.
Oh yeah, European languages are like that.
Yeah. And I was like, well, it's not going to affect me. The ribbon is true or false, as text. And it's very specific. It can't be capital true because it doesn't understand that. It's got to be lowercase true or whatever.
And it can't be -1.
Exactly. It's
because that's what I had to do. I had to, when I wrote my links table manager and my access shortcut tool, I had to rewrite those and remove all of the trues and falses in queries and in hard coded in code and replace them with zeros and ones.
Yep.
Or zeros and -1s. Or zeros and not equal to 0.
Well, I'm doing everything in Visual Basic for the most part.
Right.
Where Visual Basic understands true and false as constants. But where you get into the trouble is queries and things like that, because the query will try to localize it. Turns out my issue was when I'm using this field here, start from scratch, that's obviously just a bit field. I took a shortcut and I convert the bit field to lowercase, which returns true or false. I then pass it in and says, oh, yep, you're true or false. You're this string, great. I didn't realize that was going to get localized. So things like C string and L case and U case will localize a bit field to the language. So I've got to change that. So while I'm doing that, I will take a look at what the signature might be, or if I have to create a little snippet where you can just say, call this, pass in your tree, and it'll load the form. It probably, the only caveat I might see is that I'm managing the instances, because as you load a form, it's the same instance over and over and over again. So it's only one form.
Right.
So that may complicate things a bit, or you may have to write your own kind of thing, but yeah, we'll definitely take a look at that.
That'd be cool.
Any other questions, things people want to see? Nope. All right, well then we'll switch over to the back to the slide deck.
Okay, go ahead, Kevin. I have some comments I want to make at the very end, but go ahead with your presentation.
Okay. Well, I think I'm close to the very end. So just a quick recap about this. Like I said earlier, for this to work, I have to stick 6 tables, a couple references, 2 forms, and a partridge in a pear tree, or really a module in your database. Everything that's a configuration setting is stored in tables. You can see those tables. There's no secrets. I would recommend not editing them at the tables because I can't control that. And I think one of the big things is the ribbon requires literally no knowledge of XML. It kind of isolates the user for that. And then of course the tree view is as simple as creating a query or queries, and you can create a tree view. And then another big selling point is there's no ActiveX controls. Nothing to register. You literally just have to have the file referenced, and I will do that for you. Very similar requirements here. Access 2010 or later. Supports 32 and 64-bit. This one, however, only works with the ACCDB file format.
Hey, Kevin,
Largely,
excuse me, does your x86, x64, does that mean the same ACCDE file? You don't have two different files, compiled one for 64 and one for 86?
no, there actually are two. Yeah, there's two sets
Okay.
of library files.
Okay, gotcha.
There's actually a little bit of sample code I think I put into the add-in, which will detect which one it is, and it'll look for the right one to link to. But yeah, there's no way you can have one compiled file that'll work for both.
I just wasn't sure whether you weren't using any APIs at all, or what. So that's what I mean. If you weren't using any APIs, you could do both, but that's the only way that I've found.
Yeah, I might be using an API or two. I don't remember. Anyways, it's my understanding is that if you really want to, and it may be because my library references the Treeview library. So I think that's another
Okay,
reason.
yeah. Yep.
My library is referencing the same library as your database would be referencing, because I'm showing the tree in my library.
Gotcha.
So as I was saying, this only works with ACCDB file formats, and that's largely because the form I inject will kind of size and do things with the layout mode. It'd be a lot more work if I wanted to resize and do stuff. And hopefully by now, most people have migrated to an ACCDB if you're using 2010 or newer. It works a whole lot better, I think. And as I alluded to, there's kind of a free and a pro version. Here's the download link. It's the same one, just a different product thing. The difference between the two versions is the free version will let you build, those very simple ribbons, and that's probably going to be enough for 90% of the use cases. If you want to do a multi-level menu, if you want to do, a dynamic menu or something like that, or you want to generate the callbacks automatically, then you need the pro version. You can test drive the Treeview, which the designer fully works. It's just, and you're seeing that one case where it didn't catch the license, is that only 10 nodes will display per level. So it'll give you little messages like, hey, this is an eval mode. And then of course with the pro, you can have tens of thousands of nodes in there. Yep, so I am selling it. List price, it's completely free distribution, so you can create a bazillion apps, send it out. The plan right now is to include a year's worth of updates. After that, we'll see, if there's enough demand for it, enough features, and I can keep adding things to it. I might charge a token amount for additional updates. Otherwise, if nobody's using it, nobody's using it, and I probably won't do much with it. But it'll always work. It's not a subscription where it's going to stop working after a year. It's just you won't get updates. And then I'm doing a discount for anybody that's at this meeting, and I'll do the same kind of thing for the DevCon. I'm going to show a little quick snippet of this at the end, I think. Anyway, so if you use that coupon, you can get a pretty sizable discount. So action items, well, download the add-ins or the sample database, which is actually, the sample database is included with the Ribbon and Tree Builder. Send me feedback, tell me what you like, tell me what you don't like. There's a lot of places, especially with the ribbon importing, that you can do all sorts of crazy things with ribbons, and if I haven't seen it, there's a chance it may not work. So feel free to talk about it. And if you really like it, you can shoot me a short testimonial. I'll stick it on the website, and I'll link back to your site, and maybe I can generate a little traffic in both directions. With that, I think that's all I had. So you guys can unmute yourself and anything you want to see?
Well, Kevin, I wanted to comment that what we've seen tonight are a couple of utilities geared toward developers in Microsoft Access. And I, for one, am going to try them both out, and I think I can find a use for them in my daily business. But what impresses me the most is the level of knowledge that someone like you has to be able to go deeply into Access and write tools that developers use. I really appreciate the work you've done. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.